Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Aware Athlete Show. We're pleased today to have with us for the second time, Cheryl Ilov. And if you remember, Cheryl is a Feldenkrais practitioner, a physical therapist, an author, a black belt in Ninpo Tai Jutsu. In other words, she is a ninja. And she has written the book, The Reluctant Ninja: How a Middle-Aged Princess Became a Warrior Queen. So Cheryl, welcome to the show again.
Thank you so much, Scott, for having me. It's wonderful to see you again.
Oh, yeah, it's always nice. So Cheryl, the second word in the title of your book is reluctant.
Yes.
And I have a very, very brief experience with martial arts, and I could identify with all of the reluctant part, the difficulty of getting into something new, period, a new culture, and particularly that new culture. But I think it reflects also on our often reluctance to enter into something new that was unexpected in our life. So could you comment on the word reluctant and how that relates to your book?
Oh boy, there's a big can of worms.
Yeah.
And I think maybe reluctant can be also said resistant, because not only was I very resistant to starting, my training in the dojo, but just trying something new is very difficult. As humans, we want to be comfortable. We want to do things that we're comfortable with, that we understand, that we know, and to get out of that comfort zone and try something new, it just really rattles us. And just there's so much anxiety, behind something like that. And especially going from what I typically would do for normal activities like ballet class and Pilates to go into something like martial arts was a huge leap for me.
Yes, and yet I think that ballet must have helped a lot. I know in my very first experience, my only experience, but it was brief, with martial arts, at that point, excuse me, I hadn't had any exposure to the Feldenkrais method, and I actually wasn't very good at learning new movements.
Mhm.
And so I have to think that ballet probably was of some value to you before you entered into your training in the dojo.
I think the biggest value that it had was being able to handle physical discomfort. Because ballet doesn't always feel good, and to be able to have that aura, that sense of calm and elegance when you're really screaming inside. But when you're doing ballet with that type of pain that you're experiencing, it's self-inflicted, and you can remove the pressure anytime you want to and make changes and adaptations. Not so much when you're working with a partner.
Yeah,
And you're giving that partner permission to do things to you that you're thinking, why would I ever want anybody to do this to me?
yeah,
So, it was definitely, in some ways, the ballet training helped. And in some ways, it actually made things more difficult for me, because a lot of the postures and the positions and the movement patterns that we do in martial arts is the complete opposite of the movement patterns that we do in ballet, which everything is very extended, very long, pointed toes, and very lifted spine and upper back. And then in martial arts, it's relax your knees, flex your feet, get down low. And I'm thinking, that isn't pretty. Why would I want to do that?
yeah. So that leads to another question, which is actually part of your book a little bit, is which is more brutal, ballet or martial arts?
Oh gosh, that is such a good question. And I'm not really sure how to answer that, because in some ways I think that ballet is more brutal,
Mhm.
because you're trying to do something that really isn't natural movement. you're in an environment that isn't always necessarily very supportive. It's quite competitive, even as adults, which is ridiculous. And it just isn't as organic as something like martial arts is. And martial arts is definitely an art of survival. And ballet is almost like an art of, I don't want to say self-destruction, but it can be if you're not careful.
Yeah.
And actually doing both was a beautiful, I guess the yin and yang, or, the one end, it was a nice complement of one toward the other. Once I really got into the martial arts, I realized the longer I was doing martial arts, the better my ballet technique was getting.
Yeah. Because martial arts is very centered and very functional.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that might be an interesting point. A reason why people might read your book is because what you just said is the opposite of what you might think on the surface. Is that martial arts is about protecting yourself and ballet is about destroying yourself. And I understand what you're saying, but doesn't that seem like a contradiction to the person who has minimal exposure to both?
Right, exactly. And, it was really funny because you probably remember this from the book that, when I would go to ballet class and I would have sometimes, bruises like on my wrists from doing the wrist techniques, which is one of the first things that you learn as a beginning student. And, they teach you how to get out of the grab. And then your partner starts to hold your wrist with a little bit more pressure. So it's more difficult. And, but that's the way that you're training slowly. You learn the pattern, then you have the resistance, then you learn how to break through the resistance. And of course, all of my partners were men because most of the time I was the only woman there. So I'd show up in ballet class with these bruises on my wrists, and the dancers were horrified. And they're like, you can't do martial arts. This isn't good for you. It's not good for your body. You're going to get hurt. And then it's like, well, whatever. Then I would go on to my martial arts class and I would kind of complain, oh, my feet hurt, my toes, I did a point class today and they're looking at, or my calves are sore and stiff. And they would look at me and say, you shouldn't do ballet. It's not good for your body. You're going to get hurt.
Yeah.
And I thought that's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. We always are willing in the things that we love to do or are really involved in. We're always willing to say, what did you say? Anyway, we're willing to accept that part of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's always a little bit of discomfort in something that you're doing if it's so extreme.
And it doesn't really make much difference to us anymore. It's kind of just matter of fact. I mean, if you run 20 miles and you're a little stiff the next day, that's not, so what? I'll just get a nice
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You just accept it, you expect it, and then you put your shoes on the next day and you go for another run.
Yeah. So you had some bruised wrists, but actually, people may or may not be aware of it. But excuse me, sorry.
That's okay.
But ballet is extremely hard on your feet, or can be. And you actually could use the awareness that you get from Feldenkrais lessons to prevent some pretty severe damage to your feet.
Actually, I used Feldenkrais to not only, prevent any damage to my feet, but to reverse a lot of damage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, I mean, just working with the skeletal structure and having that understanding, not only of, my skeleton, and moving in different ways and getting out of habitual patterns of movement that actually do cause the destruction to a lot of the joints and the tissues and, the tendons that dancers experience.
Yeah. So that's a subject in itself. How did you, as you were involved in your martial arts training and you had been a physical therapist, how did the Feldenkrais, what was the timing of Feldenkrais entering into that? And how did you lay a hold of the Feldenkrais method while you were already studying something very intense?
Oh, that was really interesting because I think I started my martial arts training before, I was introduced to Feldenkrais before I did start my martial arts training, but that was only through, some classes. I took my very first Feldenkrais workshop, was actually a 3-day workshop. So that was my introduction to Feldenkrais. So I just went full in. Instead of taking one class, an hour-long class, I took a 3-day long workshop. And it was a workshop for dancers. So it's Feldenkrais for dancers. So of course, that's why it appealed to me. So we had a practitioner come up from Taos. I think she's in New Mexico. Priska Winslow is her name. And so she was coming up to do this workshop. And, it's really funny, Scott, because I'm lying on the floor wondering, why am I lying on the floor if this is a workshop for dancers? And then I'm following along the instructions, wondering, why is this person asking us all these questions? And then it was like, well, why am I even doing this? And by the end of the 3 days, I was all in. I had no idea what was happening to me over the course of those 3 days. But there was something about my body, my spirit, my mind that was so light after those 3 days of being in that Feldenkrais workshop that I knew I just had to become a practitioner just from that one workshop.
Same with me. There was things that just drew you into it where you knew you needed to understand more. So this person who gave this workshop for dancers, in the Feldenkrais method, you do certain things. Mm-hmm. But how good were they? I'm sure they were very good at then a lot of times we'll start with a reference movement and then you come back and compare. How good were they at really bringing that in to dancing after you'd done a lesson in the Feldenkrais method? What was their skill level at showing you that would adapt to dancing?
Okay, well, I think that her skill level was quite good. My skill level of understanding was rather lacking because I still really didn't understand. And, then I would take a few Feldenkrais classes in, around town. We had several practitioners. So it was real intermittent. And I still really didn't understand what was going on, except I felt so much better physically, mentally, emotionally after a Feldenkrais lesson that I didn't even try and figure out what was going on. I just accepted it. Yeah. And so it was during that time I started my martial arts training in 2003. And so, like I said, I was just dabbling kind of in the Feldenkrais method at the same time. And I knew that Moshe Feldenkrais had been a martial artist. And, I was told that the martial arts and the principles of the martial arts is interwoven very much through the Feldenkrais method. Well, then I start my martial arts training and I'm thinking, this is nothing like Feldenkrais and Feldenkrais is nothing like martial arts. These people are crazy. And I started my formal training to become a trainer in Feldenkrais in, oh my gosh, when was that? 2006, February 2006. Still didn't understand, even though you're immersed in this training. And I still didn't understand the correlation between martial arts and Feldenkrais. It took probably another year or so before I really saw it and felt it, not only just in observation, but in my own experience too.
Yeah, because, that opens up a couple more things. Let's go to something you already said. You said in your training, you were training with mostly men. Mm-hmm. And in the setting that you were in, and maybe in the time period that you were in, I don't know. Most of the martial arts training there was being done by and participated in by men. So how was that experience? You had said that required quite a bit of courage to enter into that environment because there's another culture. There's a subculture of the martial arts. How was that experience? It was difficult. And you did mention that there were some benefits to training with men.
Oh, absolutely. Initially, it was absolutely terrifying. And then it was like, okay, I'm here. I'm giving these men permission to hit me, kick me, punch me, throw me, take me to the ground, pin me. And then I told them, but for God's sake, do not mess up my makeup. Because my sensei had told me that there were plenty of other women at the dojo, higher ranking women, who would be happy to take me under their wing and teach me what it was like to be a female ninja, female warrior. He was either lying or exaggerating, because most of the time it was just me and the guys. And, they're looking at me going, well, we've never had a woman in class quite like you, because I was, I would excuse myself to go fix my lipstick or, fix my hair or whatever. And most of the women that would come through the dojo were a little bit more rough and tough and tumble than someone like me. And of course, I didn't understand why they were so serious about this martial arts stuff. And it was like, gosh, lighten up. So we had a hard time kind of getting used to each other. But once we did, it opened up, I had a whole new set of friends. And not only, we got to be very, very close, and I would train with them all the time, even outside of class times. And the guys actually taught me even more about my femininity and my feminine spirit than anything else, even going to ballet class did. So it was really kind of crazy. And it also taught me the art of communication, because men and women communicate in completely different ways. And so I was uncomfortable being around them, even to be able to talk to them in a way that, how do you talk to somebody who's supposed to be smacking you around in a few minutes? I mean, where does that conversation go? And all they wanted to talk about was martial arts. And all I wanted to talk about was going home, because I really wasn't into this that much really at the beginning. And then once we got to be comfortable with each other and learn, each other's idiosyncrasies, I'll never forget the first time one of the guys actually called me from the dojo, to get together for some extra training. And I thought, well, this is weird. I haven't had a man call me in years. I'd been married for over 17 years at that time. And he says, hey, want to get together at the dojo? How about this time, this day, blah, blah, blah. And it was like, okay, yeah. And boom. And he hangs up. And I'm sitting there holding the phone going, wow, I never knew that you could have a complete conversation in 30 seconds with just a few short sentences, monosyllables, and a see you at the end of it.
Yeah.
And it was so liberating, because with women and all my girlfriends, there was so much drama and how, I was like, oh gosh, okay, someone's calling me. I'm going to be on the phone for an hour. Better make myself comfortable. So yeah, it was very liberating, and it was a completely different experience.
Yeah. It was all business. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like, these are the key points, and take home message. Let's just go, hang up, boom.
And I think really relationships and friendships develop, in my experience, when you're in a work environment or when you're doing something together, participating in something over a period of time, and you get to respect what the other person can do, and they become a part of your participating in something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you're sharing a passion with people who have that same passion. It doesn't matter what their backgrounds are or what their personal belief system are, but it's like you come into this one, setting, environment, and it's all about martial arts, supporting each other, teaching each other, learning from each other, and, everything else just goes away.
Yeah. So some of the friends that I have that have had, some of them are not here anymore, but they were friends from school, and then later friends from work, or friends from sport. And so it's like all those things that you participate in that enrich your life that way too.
And it's wonderful, isn't it, to have all these little different sub communities, or all of these communities that are completely different. And I think that's what
Feldenkrais
makes
community.
Yeah, exactly. And even, some of my, physical therapy and respiratory therapy community that I still keep in touch with from previous careers. So there's so many opportunities to be able to get to just work and play and learn and grow from other people.
Yeah. So there is some criticism sometimes of martial arts as being, you practice, but hopefully you practice with respect for your partner, which I think is an excellent thing. and restraint. And restraint is actually a fantastic skill to learn in life.
Mm,
But there's some criticism that you never take that out into a street fight, which who wants to do that anyway?
right.
But how would that translate to the shock of, because I don't think you know unless you do it, how would that translate to the shock of an absolute brutal, nobody has any respect for you at all, you're outnumbered, and it's just a street fight. You don't see it coming. You've already
Well, you know,
kicked in the ribs and
actually, as a martial artist, if you don't see it coming, you haven't been paying attention, because
Yeah.
your awareness should be so acute and so in tune that you would never be in a situation where there would be this street fight. You would
Yeah.
never put yourself in a position of that much vulnerability. So it's training your awareness, environmental awareness, internal awareness, situational awareness. There's so many different layers to awareness. And you might think, oh gosh, that's really exhausting to always be aware all that, all the time. It's not a form of hypervigilance. It's just knowing where you are in space and knowing who and what is around you at all times. And even if, you don't know why, but you get this little funny feeling that maybe something isn't right, remove yourself from the situation.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say.
Yeah. I have read that Moshe Feldenkrais, whenever he would get into a new car, somebody was driving him somewhere, he would check out, how does this particular car, how do the door locks work? Where's this? Where's that? So that was part of his life. And I think, and, we can kind of sleepwalk through life. And so that's a good skill. It leads me to another question. And that is, why do you think that most injuries happen at the end of the day?
Oh, well, number one, you're usually tired. You're not paying attention as much.
I think that's more important than being tired.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you're thinking what's happening, after, okay, what am I going to do at the end of the day? I'm going to go home, or I'm going to do this. So you're already out of that situation, out of that environment in your head, thinking to what's coming next. And, most injuries do happen at the end of the day. And you might have been like on the ski slopes, you may have had a fantastic day on the slopes. And it's like, let's just do that one last run. And maybe you're not paying enough attention. There's a little rock, in your way, and boom, you're down and you get hurt.
Yeah, that's certainly been my experience, because you're shifting gears to, now I can go home and rest, or now I can go home and now I can go have something to eat or something like that, or I'm all done with this. All I have to do is pick up my tools.
And that's really interesting, because that comes back to my training. And I remember one of the guy, Ephraim Razumny, his nickname's Bear, he and Diana, his wife, were in our training and coordinating it. And it was something he told me one time when I did a private lesson with him. And he says, every time you change your environment, for example, when you're leaving your house, you get in your car, he says, take a moment and really, do some kind of even ritual, like, here I am in my car, and then you drive to wherever you're going. And again, every time you cross another threshold and you're going from one environment to another, take the time to stop and just acknowledge that. And he says it will trigger something in your nervous system. So then it's almost like hitting the refresh button on your computer.
Yeah, absolutely. A change in environment. That's, as you're speaking, I could just think of at least two instances where I've been hurt because I'm not thinking about what I'm doing. I am a little bit. I'm getting that done quickly, but I'm thinking about the next step instead of,
I'm going to take that same idea and kind of like, give it or put it in another type of situation. Lately, I've been doing a lot of multitasking, and it's mostly, like when I'm working on my computer or whatever. And I've made so many really silly mistakes because I knew I could get all this done. And here I am multitasking instead of paying attention to each individual task, I actually made more work for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you can multitask this way. Somebody comes up and says, I want you to do this. Don't hurry by the end of the day. So I'll just do it right then. Then it's gone. Then I can get back to what I was really doing.
Right.
So I want to come to what brought you into the martial arts in the first place. And that's, we have to go there. But then
That's
again, I do think it's good to dwell one last time on the fact that life always brings us surprises.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So you had events and conditions in your life that you were seeking answers for, and you went to a therapist, you went to friends, nobody was supporting you. And then you found acupuncture. And acupuncture kind of helped, didn't it? A little bit?
Well, I actually had been doing acupuncture for years prior to that situation.
It helped ballet too, then maybe.
Yes. And this was a new acupuncturist. So it was somebody that, I actually went to him initially for shiatsu. So it was one of my clients who I was working with at the time. And she goes, oh, this only person I've ever gone to that could really get the knots out of my back. And she was telling me about it. And she says, it's called, shiatsu, which I knew nothing about, although I was familiar with acupuncture and had been using it for years, for different ailments and stuff, and worked beautifully every single time. So, if you read the book, obviously I was in a very touchy situation and I hadn't been getting any body work or anything, no massages. And when she was talking about this shiatsu and how good it felt, and I says, do you get to keep your clothes on? And so that was like the only thing I cared about, and she says, oh yeah, you're fully clothed. And I thought, okay, maybe I can do this. So I went in to see this guy, and, so it was the first time I was, being treated by him. And when he was going through some of my symptoms, he says, I could help you even more if we did do acupuncture. So I liked the way he did his shiatsu. I liked this guy. I was comfortable with him. And so we scheduled another session. It's like, yeah, let's start doing some acupuncture.
Yeah. So that led you in an unexpected direction, because that ended up being the thing that introduced you to the martial arts, because
let's just say it was the seed that was planted.
It was the seed that was planted. Yeah. And that reminds me of something I won't go into very much, but in high school, I went out for track only because I had a different motive. I wanted my schedule changed, and that would accomplish that. I had no interest in it. I wasn't going to continue, and it changed my life. So
it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, these unexpected things that you don't intend, and they stick. So now let's go ahead and get into as much as you want to tell us about the condition that you were in. And as you tell the story, I want to really praise the book for not only laying the groundwork in your own personal story, but also taking you into the journey in martial arts, which I think we've already said could be universally applied to something you don't expect, or resistance to a new situation. But as I say, I had a really brief exposure to martial arts, and all the things that you were saying in there were like, oh yeah, you get into that and you go, oh yeah, big deal. Ki yeah. And so you have to yell that, right?
Yes.
Well, I had done some yelling and psyching myself up and stuff in weightlifting, but I still couldn't quite get into doing that on command. And so so you did such a wonderful job of taking you into all the things that you would probably react to if you weren't fully into this method yet.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's a really good thing about the book. If you read the book, you're really going to get to participate in how this would feel to enter into this culture. And the benefits at the end. So tell us as much as you would like to about use the word in the book, shredded
Shredded?
condition. Yeah,
Oh,
your self-image was shredded.
yeah,
Tell,
yeah.
tell as much as you would like to, and not more or less
Okay,
than that, of
okay.
what condition you were in, and to start with, and what you were really looking for deep inside, and how this journey began and where it went.
Okay. All right. So full disclosure, and people know the story because the genie's out of the bottle. I have told the story enough times, although I have to say it took me 19 years before I was able to tell the story. And I did it in front of a women's group. I do some public speaking, and that was the first time that I actually came out and said it. And I think that was the impetus or the permission that I gave myself. Okay, it's out now. I can do this, and I can write it in a book. So basically, at the age of 44, I walked into a doctor's office just for a routine check, somebody I didn't know. And I walked in as a healthy, vibrant 44-year-old woman. And when I walked out, I was a statistic. So predators are everywhere. And, if you listen to my podcast, my show, The Femininja Project, we do have a few stories about that. Other women being either abused, assaulted, or whatever by their ministers, one was their psychiatrist, gymnastics coach. So predators are everywhere. And this is something that we inherently know, but we never expect it to happen to us. And we never expect it to happen in a situation where you're supposed to be safe. If you're walking down that dark alley, the street fight, well, yeah, that's a possibility. But when you walk into a counselor's office, a therapist's office, a doctor's office, your minister, that should be a safe place and a safe zone. And oftentimes it isn't. And I really wanted to help bring light to that and help educate people. So basically, after it happened, and I was trying to get help. I tried to report it and tried to get help and support from my friends, even my husband, and I was completely just shut down, and no, that can't happen. I was completely just, marginalized, minimized, told even I was making it up or lying. So when something like that happens, you just stuff it deep inside of you, and welcome PTSD. Because, the way that people treated me afterwards was probably not only just as traumatic, but even more traumatic. And, I just kept trying to get help. And finally it was like, well, forget this. Well, it was probably, that had happened. It was 4 months later that I met Mark for the first time, who's my acupuncturist, who
Okay.
is now my sensei. So, he did the shiatsu without first treatment. And of course, I never told him anything about what had happened. And, we made an appointment. I went back the following week, and he says, we're going to try some acupuncture. Fine. So I had on a pair of shorts and stuff and t-shirt, and he's putting needles in. And when he started putting needles in my legs, he got a very far away look on his face. And he said, with your legs and my coaching, I could teach you how to kill with these things.
Yeah.
You do not expect to hear that.
Yeah, that you don't expect to hear that. In fact, I heard some statements like that in my brief experience, and it really turned me off.
Well, it pretty much turned me off at the time.
Yeah.
And I was horrified because I couldn't believe that somebody would actually think that way, let alone say it out loud. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking, okay, where's my purse? I got to get out of here. The man's crazy. But there I am, literally pinned to the table. I couldn't move.
Yeah.
So he had my undivided attention. So he started to, talk about the art of the ninja. He had his clinic, his martial arts clinic was right next to, or his martial arts dojo was right next to his acupuncture clinic. And kept talking about it. And he says, I would love it if you would train with me, take some classes. And I kept saying, no, that's not my thing. Not going to do that. Well, a year later, that didn't discourage him. He still kept trying to get me to take classes. And I kept saying no. A year later, he found out the whole story just came spewing out of me because I was re-triggered, re-traumatized. And then his campaign to get me on the mat went into high gear because he kept telling me that it would help me heal.
And he wasn't wrong.
No, he wasn't wrong.
Yeah.
I was the one who was wrong, and I always hate to admit that. So It still took him another 2 years after that because I didn't understand how this, martial art was going to help me heal, like this magic bullet. I don't understand how hanging out in a sweaty dojo or a smelly dojo with a bunch of sweaty men was going to help me heal. So finally, after, those 3 years all total, I broke down to take a few classes to prove to him how much I was going to hate it. And 10 years later, became his first female black belt.
Isn't that something, Cheryl?
Isn't that something? Isn't that an
Yeah.
incredible story?
That is. It is. That is a very cool story. Yeah.
It is. It's kind of like a rags to riches type of story.
Yeah. So what has that meant to you?
Oh, how do I even begin to address that? What I got from martial arts and continue to get, but what I got from it was a level of healing and understanding of self, which was correlating with my Feldenkrais training at the same time. Although I didn't really know it for the first like 2 or 3 years, what was happening. I just felt better about myself. I would still get triggered. I still had symptoms of PTSD, but they were softening. They weren't as severe. They weren't as frequent. They weren't as devastating. And it probably was about 7 years after the incident, which happened in 2000, that I realized I had no symptoms. I had no triggers. I had, every now and again, it's like the awareness will be, wait a minute, is this situation safe? But yeah, I mean, I don't deal with any of the PTSD or the trauma at all anymore.
Yeah. So initially you were felt rejected by friends and wherever you turned. And maybe it wasn't entirely their fault, because there's this thing that any friend you have, no matter how great they are, no matter how much you love them, no matter how much they contribute to your life, they never take away our responsibility to find our own inner strength. And that's a big thing with the Feldenkrais method. And that's what you found through all of this. Our friends, we can't live without them, but they're human.
And our own path to healing. And everybody's path is a little bit different.
Yeah. So another thing that I've been very impressed with, and that we just discussed a little bit, but so something that works very good in the martial arts dojo model, works very well for them from a business standpoint. But there's another aspect to it, is that as you progress up the ranks, you teach other students. Well, gee, then now I don't have to hire 50 more teachers. But we know that the best way to learn something is to teach it, because it makes you relate to what you're doing at a whole different level. So that's actually very good for the student too. And I would like you to comment on, what is our responsibility as human beings to teach the things that we learn through life?
I think that we do have almost like a moral and ethical responsibility to teach what we know. It doesn't mean that everybody wants to listen to it, and that's fine too. But I think keeping some of the knowledge and experiences to ourselves is almost selfish, because we do learn from each other. And even in doing your podcast and my podcast, it's a platform where people can share their stories, so we can learn from each other. And, as you know, learning is the key to longevity and a fulfilled life. You have to keep learning.
Yeah. So I think it's only a few years ago that I kind of discovered the idea that not only is it a good idea to live your best life, it's your responsibility. Yeah. So, and so I look at how Mark, your acupuncturist at the time, also guided you to something that was going to make all the difference in your life. And he did that because he had a passion for it,
Mhm.
And he had such a passion for it that he couldn't stop talking about it. And then he knew what he had to offer you
Mhm.
when you needed it.
And a lot of people will ask me, or they'll tell me, "Oh, Mark saw something in you. He knew that you were going to be this female warrior. He knew that you were going to be his first black belt, female black belt. He just could see it." And I would laugh because that's not it. He just saw a human being that he was very fond of. He
Yeah.
liked me and I liked him, and we got to be kind of friends. Um, and he just had that level of compassion that he wanted to help me, and he
Yeah.
really believed in how that, and that this would be something that he could help me find my way to healing. And of course, he never expected me to get to be black belt.
But
And
after you began to train, he did see that in you, I'm sure.
well, he saw an element of the spirit, but I
Yeah.
don't think he realized that I was going to make it to black belt until much later. And I'll remember, even it was at the level of brown belt, and I call him in the book Sensei Teddy Bear. The Mark's sensei from California was coming out for a seminar, and he was giving us, like the day before, he was giving us this incredibly deep philosophical and essence of the art. It was something that was, everybody was looking at him like had no idea what he was talking about. Well, I started thinking about what he told us, and I couldn't sleep at all that night. I mean, what he was talking about and these lotus petals and these movement patterns just kept going through my head, and I didn't get any sleep. So I go to the seminar the next day, and he says, Sensei says, "Are there any questions?" And I says, "Those lotus petals kept me awake all night." And he said, "Your sleep was lost because of what you got from that experience and from your thinking." And we had another long combination, and I could just see Mark's look, the look on his face from across the dojo. And then afterwards, we went around and did our rolls, our warm up. And he was just standing at the edge of the mat looking at me. And he had this funny look on his face, and he was nodding his head. And he said, "Who knew? Who knew?" So he realized at that point, I think, that, I was the one.
Yeah. So how important is it to have something in your life that you're very passionate about?
Oh my gosh, incredibly important. And I think it's important to not just have one passion, it's important to have several.
Yeah. Uh, so I've been impressed by Mark. Later on, you found that he was human also, but
Oh, yes.
yes. But what he had there was, another Feldenkrais practitioner just said when I was listening to her, she said, "I'm in this for life."
Mhm.
In other words, something had made such a deep impression with her that she was actually committed to it for the rest of her life, to helping people see this particular thing.
Mhm.
And wow.
Mhm. And as you know, because you read the book, I did take extended leave of absence. And
I was coming to that because that's kind of critical,
Mhm.
because learning is not a linear path, and it has these bumps in the road. Go ahead and tell us about that bump in the road, which almost canceled you. It was very discouraging at the time, I think.
It's funny that you say the bumps in the road, because and I'm going to segue just a little bit. When I was a little girl, I almost fell off a roller coaster. It's a long story,
Wow.
but obviously I didn't. And it just taught me a lesson, a very important lesson. I was almost 5 years old. There are a lot of bumps in the road of life,
Yeah.
ups and downs, sharp curves and everything. So the first one that really took me down was I was halfway to the black belt level. Of course, not ever intending to get that black belt, but I just kept going through the ranks. And I think we may have talked about this recently when you and I were talking before, but we're focusing on the journey and not the end result. So I was always just focused on getting through this next class. I made it through this next class. I'm learning this material, you know, eventually maybe I can test for this level, and I would just be in the journey rather than the end result.
Yeah.
Well, at this point, I was at the halfway mark, which meant that I was responsible. I was going to do a test, which was probably going to take about 2 hours long. I was responsible for every single thing I learned from day one of walking into the dojo. Everything, every technique, every, you know, weapons, you know, the philosophy, the history, the greetings, the etiquette, everything. And I even had to demonstrate some sword cuts at the end of the test. And I worked so hard for that. And I knew everything. And I was so ready for it. And we were going to do the test on a Monday morning. And that Friday, I showed up for the noon class. And only one other fellow showed up for class. It was just the two of us. And then Mark came in, and I just was feeling this vibe. Something did not feel right. And the guy who showed up for class was a black belt. And I had only met him once before, several years earlier, and we had worked together, and he was very nice. Well, make a long story short, he started tearing into me at the very beginning of class, turning things around every technique. So instead of being able to do the technique on him, he's a black belt. He knew a lot more than I did. He'd flip it around and I'd be the one on the ground. And I mean, then he started to really demoralize me, you know, verbally. And I looked at Mark for help, you know, and we communicated pretty well. He could see that I was struggling, and I looked at him, and I think I even asked him to come on the mat, and he just gave me a blank look and walked out the door. So he left me with this guy for the rest of the class. So the following day, I was going to do a private with Mark because we're going to review some things before the test. So, and I didn't want to go. I was so demoralized and so devastated. And, you know, this guy had just crushed my spirit, but, you know, you just keep on going. I showed up for the private with Mark thinking that he would help me get my confidence back and I'd get back into my mojo. And basically he picked up where this other guy had left off. And he just, you know, tore me to shreds. And in the book, I tell a story about a Feldenkrais trainer that I had who experienced something like that. He witnessed that when he was doing Aikido, of a teacher just ripping apart one of the students and just destroying their spirit. So I went home, and I mean, what really upset me more than anything else was that once again, I had lost control of a situation. I was saying no, and the person was doing something to me that was saying, I don't care. You know, he took away my power.
Yeah.
He took away my voice. He rendered me incapacitated. And once again, I was victimized or feeling victimized. And I felt that same deep sense of shame. When I went home, I was ashamed of myself for letting it happen. I was ashamed that I deserved it to be treated that way. And I felt ashamed that I was such a shameful, you know, that I was such a bad student, that, you know, I was, you know, even causing shame to the entire dojo or whatever, the kamidanas, because I was shameful.
I can't do this.
Yeah. And I just spiraled down into that deep pit of despair again, into PTSD. And I was probably at least as low as I was prior to starting martial arts, maybe even more so, because I had had that glimmer of hope. I had had that taste of what we talked about the other day, freedom. I had the freedom of, you know, being away from this PTSD and finding that inner strength and finding my voice and my courage and standing my ground. And it felt like one swift strike of the katana, it was cut out from underneath me. And I was devastated.
Yeah. So that brings us into a subject. And you at one point went to, I think, Los Angeles to study with a sensei, a seminar over 3 days. And
Yes.
people had told you he was a teddy bear.
Sensei teddy bear.
Sensei teddy bear. Yeah.
When I first met him, I was only a yellow belt, and Mark, he was coming to Denver to teach a seminar. And, you know, everybody, the whole dojo, oh, sensei's coming, sensei's coming, sensei's coming. And I thought, what is this big deal? And Mark kept saying, oh, you would love Sensei. He's so wonderful and you need to train with him. And I'm like, I'm just a yellow belt. I can't take a seminar. Oh, he loves the younger or the newer students even more than the black belt. So he convinced me to take this seminar. And I says, well, I don't want to be the only woman at the seminar. No, no, no. Oh, we'll have a lot of women there. Don't you worry about that. And of course, he told another exaggeration or a flat out lie. So I show up for this seminar, and not only am I the only woman in class, I'm the only one within like a 3-mile radius. And the next level next to me in line was a brown belt. So that was my introduction to Sensei Teddy Bear. So over the years, I mean, he was always very kind, and he was pretty scary. Very, very scary. He beat the crap out of the upper belts, but of course with me, he was very gentle, and especially, when women did show up, and there were a few other girls that did show up for the rest of the seminar, he was very gentle with us. But then as I started climbing the ranks, it was like game on. I was just another one of the guys to be smacked around and, whipped into shape. And, of course I did recover from that one incident. And I did go back to the dojo. I said I quit. I didn't test that Monday. I quit. And about a month later, I realized, wait a minute, you can't take this away from me. I worked my butt off for this. I earned it. I deserved it. I'm going to get that 2nd degree blue belt, and then I'm going to quit. Well, as you know, I didn't quit. So we had another.
Yeah, yes. which always brings up the idea of never quit when you're down.
Yes. Yeah. You can take a break, but don't quit. So then there was another incident, and this was when I was already a black belt and I was training for my Shodan. And so that would be like, a pretty big deal. And it was another situation where, let's just say, Mark behaved badly. And once again, I was starting to get that little, the voice in my head saying, you deserved this, and I realized what was happening, and I thought, okay, I'm going down that rabbit hole again, but not this time. I don't have that rabbit's going to have to learn how to live without me. I'm going to pull myself out of this. My husband and I had gone up to the mountains for like 2 or 3 days. I had some a spiritual awakening, I think, and a relationship with a bull elk that I met up there. It's in the book. It's a great story. And a little idea started to form in my head. And I thought, it's time to quit. And then it was like, no, it's not. I decided that I was going to go to LA to train with Sensei Teddy Bear all by myself, without the buffer of having anybody else from my dojo, without having Mark there, nobody. It was just going to be me and Sensei. And I was going to throw myself at the feet of the master and see what happened. If I survived, I knew my journey wasn't over. I was going to keep training. If he broke me, then I would say, okay, I'm done. It's been a great run. I'm done.
It doesn't work that way.
No.
If he breaks you, then you can't quit.
Right?
The story's not over. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. I didn't know that then.
Yeah.
But he did not break me. He empowered me through trying to break me. It was an awesome experience. It was exhilarating in a lot of ways, and one of the most brilliant decisions I ever made.
So, yes, Sensei Teddy Bear screamed and yelled at you for 3 days.
Nonstop. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nonstop.
And I think this is a wonderful example of how, and Feldenkrais was very big on resilience. Mm-hmm. But I think this is a wonderful example of how the martial arts and Feldenkrais fit together. Because if you do the Feldenkrais training, it can change your life, and it adds many wonderful things. But now you have this martial arts aspect of it. Mm-hmm. Not just that the Feldenkrais method was based on that largely, but also the experience of the martial arts. And so now you have learned not only the foundation of learning, mm-hmm. and taking care of yourself, but you have learned how to use that to do hard things.
Absolutely.
And even when Mark said to you, I don't know if he was right, I don't know if he was wrong, you said, I didn't give you what you wanted. I gave you what you needed.
Mhm.
Well, I don't know if he was right or wrong to say that then, but that is how life works.
Exactly. And we
And
don't always get what we want, but we do always get what we need. We just don't know it at the time. And I
yeah,
do want to mention something else about Sensei Teddy Bear. I can't remember the name of the Feldenkrais practitioner, but there was or is or whatever, a Feldenkrais practitioner who's a martial artist who's from Israel. He's Israeli.
oh yeah,
It's not Moti.
oh it's not, okay.
It's not Moti. It starts with a D. Duran. I want to say Duran Duran, but that's not right. Starts with a D. But he had studied. Sensei Teddy Bear had studied with this practitioner, so he was familiar with Feldenkrais. And when I was going through the training, and at the dojo, I would talk about Feldenkrais, and even Mark would poo-poo it a little bit sometimes. And one time, I was probably at the level of about red belt or whatever. And Sensei Minj came back, Sensei Teddy Bear came back to Denver and was doing a seminar, and he was talking about different movement modalities and different movement studies and blah, blah, blah. And he brought up Feldenkrais.
That was Sensei?
That was Sensei. And I'm sitting
Sensei.
there, Sensei Minj, and I'm sitting there in Seiza as he was lecturing us. And everybody on both sides of me just turned to look, and I just kind of was sitting there in Seiza and was just like, finally, now they're going to pay attention. And so he did start talking about Feldenkrais quite a bit. And I told him later, I said, do you realize I'm training to be a practitioner? So oftentimes he was out. When was he out? In October. He was out. He's 80 years old now. He was out this past October and did a seminar with us. And he did pull me aside and said, okay, keep remembering your Feldenkrais as you do this.
That was nice. Yeah. Dr. Feldenkrais understood the actual physics and mathematics of judo and martial arts better than Mark did.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and he understood how to keep yourself safe while doing those types of things better than Mark did, probably.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, because he could break it down and actually spend the time on how to do reversible movement.
Reversible movement is something that is magical, and that is so powerful. And it's something that I often will use as I'm working through a technique that I'm struggling with, and have shown it to some of the students too that I'm working with. And our dojo is very small. It's not a huge school, but just that concept of reversibility is very powerful.
Yes. So eventually, I think martial arts, you said, will always be a part of your life. It certainly will.
Oh, absolutely.
But you decided that you didn't have to just keep advancing up the ranks anymore, because your journey there, it is wonderful, but it also required you not to put time into some other things maybe that you wanted to do. Is that true?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is very true.
And so you eventually got all the benefit from it and are still getting that.
Mm-hmm.
But even so, it doesn't take you 18 or 19 years necessarily to encounter some of these principles that would enliven your life, but really it does. How long does it take you to, how long does it take you to live?
Exactly.
But one more comment on what's the difference between being a high-level martial artist and owning the moment. They can be the same, of course.
Yeah, I was going to say it's the same thing. Owning the moment, you can own the moment as a white belt.
Yes.
And it's just owning the moment to me means that level of awareness and that acuity. And again, it's not hypervigilance. It's just being able to pay attention to yourself and your environment at all times.
Right. And it means going deeper than just the movement themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of Feldenkrais, and how I use Feldenkrais not only in martial arts, but in a lot of the other things that I do, like in ballet or when I'm working with clients, of that idea of going so deep. And I've actually been teaching Feldenkrais at a dance studio It's been a very interesting experience because I thought, oh, they're not going to like this. It's not moving enough. It's just too slow. And the transformations have been incredible. So it's been wonderful.
Yeah. So now let me ask you the question we talked about earlier, is that you could teach Feldenkrais lessons. You just teach the lesson and you don't have people do a dance movement beforehand or afterwards, or you don't address how this relates to dance so much. Or you could actually really try to bring people into a comparative, here's how you do this movement now, and here's how you do it after you've experienced this new thing.
Mm-hmm.
How do you bring your whole self into integrating that into what people want to do so that they appreciate it even more?
I choose door number 2. I do a lot of like a little test move, and then we explore it at the end of a lesson. As I'm teaching the lesson, I'll do little interjections, during the lesson. And, I know in my training, we were taught that we really shouldn't, do a lot of description or a lot of explanation or how we would apply this to certain things. And the physical therapist that still lives in my head can't do that. I have to give them a little bit of practical application, not of you have to feel this or you have to do that, just possibilities. And, the type of students or the type of dancers that I'm working with right now actually are pole dancers. So we're doing, the fit pole, which is very, very, strength, extreme. It's not the, dancing around and looking naughty, but it's very gymnastic. It's very acrobatic. It's very difficult. And so to be able to break things down, my goal is to get them to understand micro movements so that when they're trying to transition from one technique to the next, and the only thing that they're doing it on is this metal pole, of how to do it in a way that they're safe, that their bodies can react in a way that they're not going to fall and hurt themselves.
Yeah. So with that, you would have to be able to use your skeleton very well. And you might even have to use the 5 lines lessons and things like that, because if you're holding your body out from a pole, you may have to know exactly where your center of gravity is. You may have to know exactly what type of a triangle you're forming for your support.
Absolutely.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So the nice thing with that is, you don't teach the pole dancing itself, but do you?
No, I don't. I do it.
You do it. So you may get into a little bit of that. So it has an immediate application.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And they're having a showcase. The studio's having a showcase, so it's like a little performance and stuff. And there are a few of the women who've come up to me and said, asked me questions because they know as a dancer who has performed. And I actually even did a competition, in a pole competition 2.5 years ago. So I competed. So, I understand stage presence. I understand how to communicate with an audience, even when, you're terrified and it's just you and a little pole.
Yeah. And we talked about the art of competition the other day.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
So that comes into that. So to conclude this, I'd like to just say that if you read Cheryl's book, and you're thinking about martial arts, it's going to be really great for you because you're going to encounter all the inward obstacles that you might find in progressing through all of this, whether it be relating to the teachers, the students, or what you experience yourself. It's really going to be great. And if you're not interested in martial arts, but you're interested in expanding your life, you're still going to be able to identify with these resistances and these rewards. And the reward of doing hard things. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking the other day, we can really access some consistent, steady strength in our lives, but it always has a humble nature, because if we'll be real quiet, we can also find our vulnerabilities. We don't have to talk about them; we can just feel them. that
Mhm.
there, you talked about being a cancer warrior the other day, and I can't imagine.
Yeah.
And so wonderful book. I urge you
Thank
to read
you.
it. And thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Scott. And it's always wonderful talking.